Turn to Exodus 14. Exodus 14. So far, when we're reading Exodus and going through Exodus, don't just think of it as history. It's really a picture of the Christian life. It's a picture of what God does with us when He leads us out of the bondage of sin, and He's leading us to a promised land. And that is a process. Now, I'm not talking about saved and going to heaven and all that kind of stuff. I'm talking about coming to the place where, as Romans 8 tells us, we are matured into the likeness of Christ. That means we start thinking and behaving Christianly. And so when we read this, don't just think in terms of history. This is also a picture of what God does with us as He's leading us. So in verse 1, do you have that map, by the way? Okay. I want to use a map because it's easier to understand where all these places are Yeah, you can go ahead and put it up because there's only 2 verses ahead of it. Okay. Y'all like the map I drew? No, I didn't really draw that. I stole it off the internet. All right, I'm just going to read the first 2 verses, and then you can kind of follow along on the map. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp near Pi-Hahiroth." I'm murdering that, but they should have called the place Ozark or Daleville or Cottonwood or something like that. They use these hard words. Even Kinsey be better. Between Migdol and the sea. They are to encamp by the sea directly opposite of Baal Zephon. So if you look up at the top, you'll see where they started when they came out of Goshen. And they go down to Succoth. They go down to Etham. And why do you think they went that way? Just looking at the map. Why do you think they went that way? Huh? Around the mountain. And they were actually taking a trade route because that trade route would get them around the river. So they wouldn't have to contend with the water. So they get down to Etham, and God tells Moses, all right, take a hard left. Now, Moses was thinking, no, I don't think so. The trade route goes this way. And God says, no, you're going that way. So that's where they take the hard left, and they go up to Baal Zephon. And that is going to be where they're going to encounter the Egyptians for the last time. So verse 3, Pharaoh will think the Israelites are wandering around the land in confusion, hemmed in by the desert. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them. But I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So that last little tag on that is very good. So the Israelites did it. They did what God told Moses to do. Now, I don't know if they were familiar with the terrain. They may have thought, well, Moses, you must know a route we've never heard of. I don't know what they were thinking. But at that moment, they had no problem with it. We've got confidence in Moses. He knows what he's doing. So if he says to go this way, we'll go this way. Verse 5. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds about them and said, "What have we done? We have let the Israelites go and have lost their service." Now, I'd love to know when that dawned on them. Maybe the next morning when I got up stretching and went to the breakfast table and looked around and said, "Where are my Wheaties? Where's my eggs? Where's my bacon? I don't see anything out here." And maybe the wife said, "Oh, don't you remember? We let them go last night." And so this started spreading throughout where people noticed that the service the Israelites had been providing as slaves. There was no one there to do that service, which meant it was going to fall on who? It was going to fall on them. And so they quickly said, oh, no, we got to correct this. So they go to Pharaoh and say, we got to correct this. And I'm sure Pharaoh by then had some awareness too that some of the things he was accustomed to the slaves doing weren't getting done. And the big one for Pharaoh would have been the construction of those cities would have stopped, because that's what got the Israelites enslaved to start with. He wanted to build 2 cities, and they used them as slave labor. Now they had no slave labor. And so he sees what's going on. The people see what's going on, so he decides, okay, let's go get them. Verse 6, so he had his chariot made ready and took his army with him. He took 600 of the best chariots, along with other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. Why would you need that for a bunch of folks walking who have no weapons? They're going to make a point. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, so that he pursued the Israelites who were marching out boldly. I bet they were. I mean, if you were just been let go and you were leaving slavery behind, I bet you would kind of strut a little bit. Walk out boldly. Ooh, I'm free of that. I'm free of that. Life's going to be good now. I'm free of that. You know, one of the things, and this is sidebar to what we're reading, but there's a phenomena that when people get free of something, if they've been in bondage a long time, they don't know how to handle freedom. And so a lot of times they'll misuse it. And they'll actually misuse freedom to the point of hurting themselves because they're just not accustomed to being free. But right now, that wasn't a problem for these folks, so they were heading out boldly. We're free now. We're free now. Verse 9. The Egyptians, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, horsemen and troops, pursued the Israelites and overtook them as they camped by the sea opposite Baal-zephon. Now, I called this today, I know some people like titles. I just usually start without one, but my catchy title for if we made a thumbnail, Between a Sea and a Hard Place. Because that's exactly where they were. They figured it out that probably figured it out they made a mistake, they thought, when they first said, what's all that water? We're going to be hemmed in here. There's nowhere to go. Because to the north was just barren desert. They couldn't escape that way. And when they looked around, they saw this dust cloud way off. And that dust cloud kept getting closer and closer. It's kind of like I heard somebody say the other day, if you're watching a tornado and it doesn't seem to be moving, it's coming for you. You need to go get in shelter somewhere. And they saw this dust cloud, and it was starting to get closer, closer, closer. And they looked that way, and they see that big body of water, and they look back that way, and that cloud's getting closer and closer and closer. Uh-oh, we're in trouble. Well, verse 10. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. And they were terrified and cried out to the Lord. Now, I cannot be critical, because if I'd been there, I'd been hollering the loudest. Because I'd been saying, oh my goodness, what Moses has messed up. He's got us in a place where we can't defend ourselves. We can't escape. We can't get out of here. We're hemmed in. So they started crying out to the Lord, oh, God, save us. Oh. And in verse 11, they said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? So who are they blaming now? Moses. A day earlier, he was their champion. Today, he was an idiot. That's how fickle people are. That's why you don't ever want to base anything about yourself on what other people think. Because what other people think can change just like that. And so what other people think about you is really irrelevant. What God thinks about you is what matters. And so they're turning on Moses. Verse 12, didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. Now, what's going on there? Well, for one thing, they're blaming Moses for introducing them to freedom. They'd much preferred the familiarity of bondage. Now, I know sometimes I say this and people don't believe it, but it's true. There is power in the familiar. Because the familiar gives a sense of security and predictability. That's why people will stay in domestic violence situations for so long, because they know they need to get out of it. They're not stupid, they know that. But there's something in them that won't let go of the predictable. So yeah, they know when he comes home Friday night and he's already been drinking, he's going to smack her around a little bit. But at least I know what to expect Friday night. That's the power of the familiar. We've always done it this way. We're going to always do it this way. Not because it's a better way than any other way. It's just the familiar way. Does that make sense to everybody? It's kind of like seeing somebody, say I can talk about older folks now because I are one. But it's kind of like, you know, with older folks, and when they come out with all this new technology. And I remember when my dad got his first computer, which was ancient, he called me and said, come over here and show me how to turn this thing on. And so I showed him how to turn it on. He never did figure out all that Windows stuff. He was accustomed, although he didn't do it, he made my mom do it, but he was accustomed to a typewriter. They knew how to use a typewriter, this newfangled invention. They just didn't know that. So guess what he always used? The typewriter. Even though he had a computer sitting in there on his desk. The power of the familiar. Many times when God's getting ready to do something in our lives, it's going to require change. It may require putting us between a sea and a hard place. Because he knows that without that sea and the hard place, we won't ever change. And when God has decided we're going to change, guess what's going to happen? We're going to change. Only question is, how rough's it got to get? I mean, back when I was teaching school, I knew a year or two ahead of time that my time there was done. And the Lord was saying it's time to move on. And I'm saying, no, I got it set pretty good here. You need to take that up with somebody else. And the Lord every now and then would come back and say, you need to get ready. If you're not going to cooperate, I'll do it for you. And I didn't cooperate, and he did it for me. Unexpectedly, one day, I found myself between a sea and a hard place. Because God was wanting to bring a change in my life I did not want. And I'm going to tell you, most of the time, the changes God wants to bring in our life, we don't want. You can even see this when people say, well, we just need a revival or a fresh outpouring of the Spirit. And they get all kinds of visions of what that would look like. The only thing is, it can't change what we're doing and has to happen between 10 and 12 on Sunday. But other than that, we're good. The power of the familiar. To the point that these people are reminding Moses, didn't we tell you to leave us alone? We love it here. You know, that whip that was on my back today, that was kind of like therapy. You know, the way they mistreat us, we probably had it coming. As horrible as it is, at least we know what to expect tomorrow. Verse 13. Moses answered the people, do not be afraid. Now, I don't know how well that sold right then, because they were griping, complaining, scared to death. They saw the water. They saw the Egyptians coming. And a message of do not be afraid probably didn't sell very well. In fact, somebody probably said, Moses, would you please look around? And you're talking about don't be afraid. No, this is the time to be afraid, Moses. But he said, don't be afraid. Stand firm. Now, stand firm means like a soldier guarding his post. Stand firm. In other words, don't run. You stand right here. Now, you know what that requires? Faith. It requires faith. Because there's times today God will say, stand firm. Often it's when it comes to standing for the truth. Because I'm going to tell you, we live in a day when truth's not popular. My truth's popular to me. But the idea of objective truth is not popular. I shared with y'all what I saw in court the other day for those who were here that night. As a potential juror told the judge, I can't reach a conclusion on a case. I can't judge somebody unless what they did violates my truth. I don't care what the state says. My verdict's going to be based on my truth. So if what he did, I can justify it some kind of a way, I'm going to let it go. You say, man, that's some crazy stuff. I know. It's called postmodernism. And that's what rules our culture today. It was one of the sneakiest ways Satan had to get a grip on this country. To convince people there's only your truth. There's only your version of reality. And then when real life starts beating them up, they don't know how to handle it. Because real life, objective truth doesn't bend to our wishes. Stand firm. Do not be afraid. And you will see the deliverance of the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Egyptians you see today, you'll never see again. It could be, and I could probably say all of us probably, have some Egyptians in our lives that occasionally show up. And we may feel like we're hemmed up between a sea and a hard place. And they just show up and they pester us and they attack us. And you know, when we go through all the heartache, all the struggle, all the frustration of everything, when these Egyptians show up and just wreak havoc in our lives. And they do it over and over and over and over. It could be anything. It could be addictions. It could be just ordinary problems, whatever it is. Everybody's Egyptians are different. But they've been showing up a lot. And when they show up, it's never good. Because what they want to do is enslave you again. That's why when people who have come out of addiction, for example, for the first little bit, and a little bit varies, so I'm not going to put a number on it, but for the first little bit, they are walking in sobriety. Life's great. I'll never go back to do that again. And then the Egyptian shows up. But I'm not just picking on that. I mean, that can happen to all of us. God could show you something, and God could show you something in the Word that just totally makes you do flips in the house. And you see what God is saying about some issue, and you say, you know what, this has been an issue in my life for a long time. God, I repent. I receive your forgiveness, and I receive your power to be set free. And God can free you just like that. And you can walk in peace and enjoy the presence of the Lord and everything else. And down the road, maybe a little bit, you get to thinking about it one day. You remember it one day, which is usually a mistake. But you'll think about it again one day, and you say, boy, I sure do like walking in freedom. You're familiar Egyptians here? Let's talk a while. And before long, they're off. They've gone off. It could be, like I said, addiction could just be, like I was saying, God doing a work in your life. And maybe you see it. Maybe you've enjoyed walking in freedom because of it. But then some familiar situations pop up. And when these familiar situations pop up, they kind of knock you sideways. And you're kind of, I wasn't expecting this, God. I thought it was all going to be easy now. And you're giving me triggers. Well, James would argue with you. James would say God doesn't send triggers. He said God tempts no one. When we're tempted, we're being drawn away by the lust in our hearts. So these triggers show up. We start entertaining them a little bit. What great news that if we find ourselves like them, between a sea and a hard place, what great news it'll be if we'll just stand firm. And then the second part of it is move on. And you say, what does move on mean? It means move on. It means go forward, not in reverse. You see, God drives a car that has no reverse. God doesn't go backwards. He goes forward. And so one of the things, I had this conversation with somebody the other day, and he said, well, I don't know. It was some things that had been in his life, and he had thought he had victory over them, but didn't have victory over them, and you know how that all goes. And he said, what can I do? I said, are you a believer? Well, when they start that, you're about to get a story. Well, I went to church as a boy, and well, Grandma was a good Christian person, so, and are you a believer? I used to be. What happened? All these failures, all these setbacks. I don't know what to do. I said, first thing to do is you need to get your heart right. You need to get on your face before the Lord and get your heart right. I don't know if you're saved or not. That's not my call. That's between you and the Lord. If you're not, you need to get saved because you're not going to get divine help apart from it. But if you are, you're far away from home. You need to get your heart right. I said, and the second thing you need to do is forgive yourself. If God forgave you, and if you ask him to, he says he will. He's faithful and just to forgive us our sins if we confess them. Then why are you better than God? And you're going to hold on to the offense. Because what happens is a lot of times we can hold on to these failures, setbacks, offenses, whatever, and we just think, well, woe is me, I'm not supposed to do this, and not supposed to, I can't believe I did that, I can't believe I said that, I can't believe, and run through all these things we can't believe. What can you change of that? Nothing. That's why when I'm counseling people, I tell them up front, I'm not your regular counselor. I'm not going to sit here for 8 weeks to listen to you talk about your childhood. Because there's nothing you can do to change it. I don't want to hear about all the people when you're growing up who offended you in some kind of way. Because there's nothing we can do to change it. I don't want to hear about all your failures, setbacks, and all this other stuff. Because there's nothing we can do to change it. But what we can do is start today. Where are you at today? Now, where do you want to be? All right, you know where you are. You know where you want to be. What's it going to take to get there? Well, this is, write it down. There's your counseling plan. And that's why I don't have a lot of repeat business. I'm just, I'm not going to sit there and listen to them whine about daddy letting them down and stuff like that. Because we all got those stories. You know, what people call trauma today, we called life growing up. I heard somebody the other day say, I'm so traumatized from my childhood. Really? Yeah, we never went on vacation. Okay. We didn't either. You know what? I survived. And sometimes people will look at our church as small as it is, and we do have children's ministry going. It's small, but it's still going. We got youth ministry going on Sunday nights. It's small. I don't know. Ron may just get outside and have fun with them and be silly. I don't know. I hadn't been. But, for a lot of youth pastors, it's more like silly night than youth meeting night. And that's okay. My son-in-law is a youth pastor. He's been trained in what to do and so forth. But I grew up in a church where there was neither. There was no Sunday school, except my dad preaching. There was no youth group, because I was the youth group. So wherever I went, the youth group was there. And you say, some people today would say, oh my goodness, that would so traumatize me. I just called it life. Because everybody doesn't have a perfect life. Nobody's going to get everything they want in life. There's going to be times where God, if you belong to God, there's going to be times God's going to tell you things you don't want to hear. And He's going to tell you to do things you don't want to do. And so, for those who like points, I'm going to give you 4 off what we read today. Number 1, from this story, God was directing their steps, and that's important. Moses wasn't making a mistake. He was doing what God told him to do. Others thought he was making a mistake. But what others think is irrelevant when God tells you to do something. That's that verse, Proverbs 16:9. This is a good one for the refrigerator, for those who like verses on the refrigerator. Just put it upside, I can do all things through Christ. Like say no to ice cream. In their hearts, not the mind, in their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. And so there's going to be times that in my heart, I've planned, this is how my life's going to go. This is what I'm going to do. This and get that ball into motion. And God can come along and say, no. You thought you were going to do this, but you're really going to do that. I heard a great example of this. Somebody was talking about David Gibbs earlier, and I was listening to the sermon. He shared this. But he said he was in a church one Sunday night preaching, and during the altar call, this couple came down. And when they came down, there was a huge reaction in the church. Some were shouting, some were like shaking their heads. And he said, I didn't know all this commotion. And he went over to the pastor and he said, what's going on with this? And the pastor said, this man is one of a handful of medical specialists who can do intracranial reconstruction. Is that a thing? Okay. I was making sure I was following because I have no clue. But he's one of the few who can do this. He just finished his residency that lasted 14 years. And he said 5% of people who go through this program graduate. He was in the top 5. Brilliant. You're about to hear. But he was getting offers from all over the country, as you would imagine, from hospitals. One offer he got from a hospital, huge hospital in California. They offered him $5 million to sign the contract. They said, plus, if you'll sign the contract, in addition to the money, we're going to buy you a house. We're going to buy you a house in this Upper D neighborhood that's going to cost us at least $200,000. And we're going to give it to you. Plus, we're going to make sure you and your wife drive a new car every year. Now, I don't know about you, but somebody'd have to slap that pen out of my hand. Because my name would be going on the line. And then they followed up with, if that's not enough, let us know. But God had different plans. And God was calling him and his wife to be missionaries to Brazil. And that night, he surrendered. So, David said, he said, in fact, when they came up, he went down to hug him and pray for him and all that. And said, 2 men came out of the crowd and walked up to him, to Brother Gibbs, and said, would you please straighten him out? Straighten him out. All that money he's given up. He could use that money. I always love this. He could use that money to send multiple missionaries to the field. Kind of like Judas. Just think what we could do with the poor if she had just given us that money. And he responded, I'm not going to tell him that because he's not yours. He's not mine. He's the Lord's. And if the Lord's calling him to Brazil, that's where he needs to go. So he went from what could have been a very illustrious career in the best hospitals in the country to running a primitive hospital in the Amazon. They had a dirt floor. And Gibbs kept up with him. And he said the last time he talked to him, he said the man told him this. He said, we have several hundred people every week that come to our clinic, and I'm able to help them. And he said, you know what's even better than that? He said, we have several hundred people a week who give their heart to Jesus. And he said, I'd rather be there than in the best hospital. See, that's this. The people thought, Egyptians thought, man, you done messed up. But Moses said, we're right where we're supposed to be. All right, number 2, fear distorts reality, perceptions of reality. Fear distorts perceptions of reality. And that's because fear drains faith. When fear sets in, faith has to leave. And so what I meant by distorting reality is they were actually in the place of romanticizing slavery. Again, power of the familiar. And then even more than that, they blame Moses. Moses, why didn't you just let us sit over there? You know, life wasn't that good, but it was predictable. And we could have died there as good as we could die out here. So their whole perception of reality was distorted. Number 3, God was not sympathetic to their whining. Now, I know nobody here whines when they're between a sea and a hard place, so that's just for me. But God knew they were fearful. He knew that whatever faith they had was being tested to the limit. But they had moved from fear and dread and, don't know what could happen here. They had moved from that to being faithless and criticizing God. God just set us up. He got us out here in the middle of nowhere just so we can get killed. So God's solution for their whining was, first of all, stop whining and criticizing me. Second, he said, stand firm. And that again is like a soldier guarding his post. But then after telling them to stand firm, he's going to follow that up with move on. Moving on is part of recovery. Moving on, and recovery, there's more than just from substance abuse. I'm talking about recovering from failures, shortcomings, everything else. Whatever God's doing in your heart, where he's telling you stand on the truth and then move on. Because if you camp out there, where, I'm just going to stand firm. I'm going to stand firm on the truth. I'm going to stand firm. The problem is you're going to get so fixated on fighting whatever that Egyptian was that eventually you're going to give in. You'll compromise the truth. You'll find a way to justify it and be at peace with the fact you're a slave again. So stand firm. And lastly, move on. All right, number 4. There is a time to stand and there is a time to move on. So sometimes we find ourselves between a sea and a hard place, and it's a standing time. Maybe God knows that we're prone to being wishy-washy. We're prone to standing for the truth until it gets hot, until it gets difficult. And so God speaks to that situation. He says, stand firm on the truth. Well, what if they don't like it? They probably won't. Because like I said, truth is not in fashion today. But he didn't say if it's popular to do it. He just said, stand firm. Now, in telling them to stand firm, he was telling them, trust me. I'm going to take care of this situation. I'm going to take care of this situation because I led you in it. No, God would never do that. Well, whoever's telling you that, you need to stop listening to. God will do that. There's a time to stand. But then there's a time when you've got to move. Because now, as we'll see later, the standing firm, God's going to deal with the Egyptians so that they can move on and move across the water. But then when they get on the other side of the water, Moses is going to tell them, now stand firm and watch. And they saw that army destroyed for the last time. What a blessing when we see our own Egyptians destroyed for the last time. So, Father, I thank you for today. I thank you, Lord, that you are on the throne, that you make no mistakes, and that if we entrust our way to you, you will guide us into the places in life where you want us to be. And we may not know why. We may not see the reasons why. It may not make any sense. We may think it's a mistake. But you've already got a plan at work. And that plan may just be not only to strengthen our faith, but to allow us to see the destruction of the Egyptians that keep bothering us for the last time. And so, Lord, I thank you so much that you are engaged in our lives and that you care. And so may we, in turn, surrender our lives to you and to what you want us to do. May we be obedient and trust you. In Jesus' name, amen. Bless you. Remember, Wednesday night, 5:45. 5:45, we're going to eat. It's no free chicken dinners, but bring something. Covered dish. And then Judy will speak. We'll try to get in here as quick as we can. So she can, because she usually takes about 30 minutes or so to show what she's doing. Next Sunday morning, we have our fellowship time. Tonight, youth group. I was trying to remember what else I saw on the sign. Prayer meeting Wednesday night. Oh, by the way, we'll take July off from Wednesday night prayer meeting like we usually do. So if you're one of our Wednesday night people, you might want to mark that down. Unless you want to come out here and sit by yourself. Now, if you want to do that, that's okay. Let's see. Was that all that was up there? Bring the baby bottles. I think that was it. Well, and they're doing a good work, not only with the mothers, but they have expanded their counseling services. So it's well worth the investment. And I'll give you one more name to pray for before we go. My cousin called me during Sunday school and told me her son has stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And said, the doctor said there's nothing we can do. So we know a doctor who can do. His name's Tony. Tony. His last name is Summers, but with a U instead of an O. He's about 50-ish. Even more than physical healing, he needs spiritual healing. And so I'm more concerned that he gets that than I am about the other. All right, anything else before we go? Okay. Okay. All right, Tom Morris. Morris. All right, well, be blessed, and we'll see you next week. And if you need prayer, come on up. I'll be up here for a while.